Heavy chains rattle in the darkness. I feel my way along the cold stone walls, embracing the eternal darkness. This is my world now. I am Samson, once a judge of Israel, now a prisoner of the Philistines. Day after day, I push the millstone in Gaza's prison. The pain of losing my sight is nothing compared to the torment within. Each turn of the mill brings back memories of the past, those glorious victories, those fatal weaknesses, and the regret that can never be erased, echoing endlessly in the darkness. My strength came from the Lord, yet I squandered it away. Now, in this long night, I finally see myself clearly. The sound of the grinding mill echoes in my cell, like footsteps of time, taking me back to those moments that changed my destiny. My story is a tale of strength and weakness, of betrayal and redemption, and above all a story about God. In this eternal darkness, I begin to understand. Sometimes losing sight makes one see more clearly. Let me start from the beginning to tell this story of both glory and shame. I came from a turbulent era. Israel was in its darkest hour. The Lord's people lived under the iron rule of the Philistines. For 40 long years, the Philistines were a mighty nation. They came from across the sea, settling in the coastal plains of Canaan, building 5 fortified cities: Ashkelon, Gaza, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. These 5 cities formed a powerful alliance, ruling from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. They mastered the art of ironworking, forging sharp weapons and mighty chariots, while we Israelites could only resist with bronze tools and farm implements. The Philistines forbade us to forge iron. Even our plowshares and axes had to be sharpened at their smithies. Such was our humiliation. They worshipped Dagon, building temples in every city, holding grand sacrifices, mocking our faith. My people lived in fear, forced to pay tribute to the Philistines. Sometimes they would raid our villages, taking our grain and livestock. But what pained me more was how many Israelites had grown accustomed to slavery, even beginning to imitate the Philistine way of life, worshiping their gods. It reminds me of what the book of Judges says. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines. Yet in such times, the Lord had not forgotten his people. He began to prepare a deliverer. This is where my story begins. In the town of Zorah lived a God-fearing couple, Manoah and his wife, my parents. My mother had been barren for many years, which in Israel at that time was a source of great sorrow. It was seen as God's punishment. Whenever other women passed by our door, carrying their infants, Mother would silently weep, praying in the corner. Though Father never blamed her, he too was deeply troubled. They longed for a child to continue the family line. They went to worship at Shiloh, bowing before the tabernacle, begging God for mercy to grant them a son. Mother often went alone, under the fig tree beyond the village, pouring out her heart to God, waiting for his mercy. At every new moon sacrifice, they were especially devout, believing God would hear their prayers. Year after year, they waited, holding fast to their faith, looking to God's promises, until that day when a miracle appeared, changing their lives. And beginning my story, it was an ordinary afternoon. Mother was resting in the field when suddenly a brilliant light shone, and an angel of God appeared. His appearance was awesome and fearsome, his radiance outshining the midday sun. Mother fell to the ground in terror, but heard a gentle voice. Though you are barren, you will conceive and give birth to a son. He will be a Nazirite dedicated to God from birth, beginning the deliverance of Israel. Mother, hearing these words, was both amazed and confused. She ran home immediately to tell Father the news. Father Manoah, upon hearing this, prayed to God, saying, "Let the man of God come again to teach us what we must do." God heard Father's prayer. The angel appeared again to Mother. This time Father was present, reverently inquiring God's will. The angel repeated the earlier prophecy and explained the rules in detail. This child would belong to God for life. No razor to touch his head, no wine to pass his lips. Father prepared to offer a sacrifice, but the angel said, "Offer it to the Lord," then ascended in the flame, proving he was truly God's messenger. Father cried out in fear, "We are doomed to die, for we have seen God." But Mother said, "If the Lord meant to kill us, he would not have accepted our offering, nor shown us all these things, nor promised us a son." Such wonderful prophecies were not unknown in Israel, like Samuel and John the Baptist, born through divine intervention. My parents waited with anticipation for God's promise to be fulfilled. They knew this child would carry a special mission. The Nazirite vow was a solemn covenant. From the day of my birth, I would be holy to God. No wine or strong drink, no razor to touch my head, no going near the dead. These were the sacred rules. During her pregnancy, Mother kept these rules strictly, eating nothing unclean, to bear a holy vessel. Such dedication was not rare in Israel, but usually voluntary, and for a limited time. Yet I was set apart from the womb. This was God's special calling and a heavy responsibility. My mission was to begin Israel's deliverance from the hand of the Philistines. This was God's will. Long hair was the sign of strength and a symbol of obedience, showing that my life belonged completely to the Lord. Such a mission required great faith and constant dedication to fulfill the trust. I grew up in Zorah. My parents, following God's command, carefully taught me to keep the Nazirite vows, staying away from grapes and all unclean things. As I grew older, the Spirit of God began to work in me, making me incredibly strong. This strength was like God's seal, growing with the years, manifesting at specific moments, amazing everyone. The first display of divine strength came in my early teens, when I effortlessly lifted a stone that 3 men couldn't move. News quickly spread through the village. People talked endlessly, saying this was God's grace, that wonders would surely follow. Some called it a miracle, a testimony of the Lord's presence. Others harbored doubts, not understanding God's purpose. My parents watched with mixed joy and concern, rejoicing that God's promise was being fulfilled, worried that this strength would bring temptation. Indeed, in those days, I struggled within myself. This extraordinary strength, was it a blessing or a burden? Sometimes I wondered why God had chosen me, giving me such a gift, along with such responsibility. But whenever I quieted myself, remembering God's promise, I knew this strength wasn't for me, but for God's purpose. I began to understand that God's grace always comes with a mission and is accompanied by trials. So in Zorah, I grew up, waiting for God's time, preparing for the challenges ahead. That day, I walked the road to Timnah. It was high noon. All around was silent, save for the wind through the vineyard. Suddenly, a young lion sprang from the vineyard, its eyes flashing with fury, its roar terrible to hear. In that critical moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon me, filling me with strength, driving away all fear. I faced the lion, grasped its jaws with my hands, and with God-given strength, tore it apart. As recorded in Judges chapter 14, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson. He tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat, though the fight was fierce. The lion's claws tore my clothes, but with God's presence, I remained unharmed. Finally, the lion lay lifeless on the ground. This was the Lord's doing. revealing his mighty power. I didn't tell my parents, for I understood in my heart. This was a covenant between God and me, a sign of his choosing. This victory bred pride in my heart. I began to believe I was invincible, forgetting the source of my strength. This was the beginning of my spiritual fall. At that time I didn't understand why God allowed this to happen. Not knowing this encounter would become a future testimony. Several days later, passing by that place again, remembering my battle with the lion, I went to look at its carcass. To my amazement, in the lion's body, a swarm of bees had made their home, producing honey. How wonderful this was! From death came forth sweetness. This mighty creature's body had become a dwelling place of life. I took some of the honey, eating as I walked, pondering in my heart God's wonderful works. From death came forth sweetness. From ruins came new life. Was this not a miraculous sign that God could turn curse to blessing and death into life? This honey in the lion's carcass, like comfort in suffering, foreshadowed God's presence in tribulation and pointed to the coming redemption. Though I didn't understand this mystery, I pondered it silently in my heart, knowing God's purpose would be revealed in days to come. Some time later, I went to Timnah again. At the city gate, I met a Philistine woman, beautiful in appearance, graceful in manner. Such an encounter, perhaps, was arranged in God's plan, yet it threw my heart into great turmoil. I knew God's law well. Israelites must not marry foreigners, especially as a Nazirite. I should remain set apart. But my heart was drawn to her, as if pulled by an invisible force. Was such affection, according to God's will? Returning to Zorah, I told my parents, I have seen a woman in Timnah. Please get her for me as my wife. Father was shocked. Mother was deeply troubled. They earnestly pleaded with me to think carefully. Among the daughters of Israel, could you not find one to your liking? Why must you marry a daughter of the uncircumcised? But my mind was made up. I insisted to my parents, she pleases me. Get her for me. Though troubled, they yielded to my wish, not knowing this was from the Lord, seeking an occasion against the Philistines. As recorded in the book of Judges, this was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity to confront the Philistines. The wedding was held in Timnah. According to Philistine custom, they provided 30 companions to feast with me. This wedding should have been a joyous occasion, yet danger lurked beneath, like calm before a storm. Looking at these young Philistines, a thought arose in my mind to test their wisdom with a riddle. I said to them, let me tell you a riddle. If you can solve it within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if you cannot solve it, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. They eagerly agreed, waiting for my riddle, not knowing it came from my encounter with the lion. I said, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. This was my riddle. 3 days passed. No one could solve it. They began to grow restless, like trapped beasts. From the 4th day, they threatened my bride, saying if she didn't extract the answer, they would burn her father's house. My wife pressed me daily with tears, saying, if you love me, why won't you tell me the riddle? Am I not your companion? Her daily weeping wore down my resolve. On the 7th day, I finally told her. She immediately told her people. Before sunset, they smugly said to me, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? I heard the betrayal in their words. Burning with anger, I said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. The joy of the wedding turned to seeds of hatred. This battle of riddles planted the seeds of disaster. The Spirit of the Lord moved me again. Anger burned within me to avenge this betrayal and shame, to seek justice. I went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 Philistines, took their clothes, and gave them to those who solved the riddle. This revenge was not just for the riddle's wager, but for their deceit and contempt for God. I left Timnah in anger, returning to my father's house, leaving my bride behind, like a discarded garment. At wheat harvest time, I took a young goat to visit my wife, but heard shocking news. Her father said, "I thought you hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Her younger sister is more beautiful. Let her be yours instead." These words were like torches, igniting the fire in my heart. I said, "Now I have a right to harm the Philistines." I caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together. Between every pair of tails, I fastened a torch. I lit the torches, released the foxes into Philistine fields, burning their grain and crops, their olive groves destroyed. The Philistines investigated the cause. Learning of the Timnah people's deceit, they burned my wife and her father to death. This revenge, though born of my anger, fulfilled God's purpose to strike at the Philistines. But this was just the beginning. Greater battles lay ahead. God would use me as his vessel to accomplish his plan. The Philistines' revenge came like a flood. They gathered their army, jumping in Judah. The people of Judah trembled, asking the Philistines, "Why have you come to attack us?" They said to bind Samson. 3,000 men of Judah came to the cave at the rock of Etam, saying to me, "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us? They want to bind me, to hand me over to the Philistines." I said to them, "Swear to me you won't kill me." They bound me with 2 new ropes. From the cave, they brought me up. When I reached Lehi, the Philistines came shouting, thinking victory was theirs, ready to mock God's servant. Just then, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon me again. The ropes that bound me became like charred flax. I broke free from the bonds. Seeing a fresh donkey's jawbone, I reached out and took it, struck down 1,000 Philistines. This was the Lord's doing. He used the humblest tool to accomplish the greatest deed, revealing his glory. With a donkey's jawbone, I made heaps of dead. With a donkey's jawbone, I killed 1,000 men. This was God's mighty power, witnessed through me. My fame spread throughout Philistine land. Wherever I went, people feared me, yet secretly sought my weakness. I should have remembered God's calling, kept myself from temptation, but the pride deep within made me think I could resist temptation. One day I came to Gaza, the mightiest Philistine city. My arrival shook the entire city. Learning I was staying in the city, they surrounded me, guarding the city gate all night, planning to kill me at dawn. They said, "When morning comes, we will kill him. Even his strength cannot escape this city." I slept peacefully within until midnight, disregarding their schemes. Such was my pride. At midnight I arose, grasped the city gates with their posts. Together with the bar, I tore them loose, carried them to the top of the hill. I thought this was victory, not knowing it revealed my weakness. I began to take God's gift lightly, treating strength as a toy. Each victory made me more arrogant. I began to disregard God's commands, thinking strength allowed me to do as I pleased. I no longer feared the Lord, instead sought pleasure among the Philistines. This strength became my license for indulgence, rather than an instrument for God's glory. I moved freely in Philistine territory, coming and going in their cities, as if in my own home, forgetting my sacred calling. I began to be drawn to their customs, enticed by their women, gradually straying from God's way, losing my initial caution. This experience, though seeming like another victory, was actually a breach in my spiritual life, planting seeds for future failure. I should have left this land, yet I lingered here. I should have guarded my heart, yet I indulged myself here. God gave me strength, not for showing off, but to fulfill his purpose, to deliver Israel. Day after day, I came and went in Philistine territory, enjoying the fame my strength brought. Intoxicated by this unrestrained life, the Philistines grew accustomed to my presence, no longer setting ambushes everywhere. I too began to lower my guard, growing closer to them. Sometimes at their feasts, I would taste forbidden wine, listen to their foreign tales. Forgetting I was a Nazirite, God warned me many times, but I always took chances, thinking as long as my hair remained uncut, I would never lose my strength. I was completely lost then, no longer remembering I was set apart for God. I used God's gift to please myself, treating the Holy Covenant as a game. The altar in my heart had long fallen, replaced by idols of pride and lust. I thought keeping outward rules would preserve God's presence forever, until that day, walking in the quiet vineyards of Sorek Valley. Unknowingly, I walked into the trial God had prepared for me. In the valley of Sorek, I met Delilah. Her beauty surpassed all women I had known, yet she became the snare of my life. She lived in a house by the vineyard, alone and unbound. Her beauty and freedom deeply attracted me, drawing me back again and again. Our relationship quickly grew intimate. She knew I was a Nazirite, knew of my extraordinary strength, yet always curious about its source. Her eyes held mystery, her words full of enchantment. I was intoxicated, forgetting God's warnings. The Philistine leaders came to her, promising 1,100 shekels of silver to discover the secret of my strength. She began testing me with love. Delilah enticed me with sweet words, asking for the secret of my strength, saying if I truly loved her, I should keep nothing from her. The Philistines promised her 1,100 shekels of silver. This enormous reward hardened her heart to betray me. At first I deceived her with lies, saying if bound with 7 fresh bowstrings, I would become as weak as any man. She did this while I slept. I woke to her cry, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." I snapped the bowstrings easily, like burnt flax. Delilah accused me of deception, saying I didn't love her. Otherwise, why would I lie? She pressed me day and night with tears. The second time I lied again, saying if bound with new ropes, I would lose my strength. She did as I said. When she cried out about the Philistines, I broke the ropes again, as easily as breaking a thread. This time she grew angrier, accusing me of mocking her, saying this would cost her love. She kept testing me with words, making my heart weary. The third time she asked, I said if she wove 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on the loom, it would work. She did this too, yet I broke free again. Delilah pressed me daily with her words, until I was tired to death. This was my weakness, powerless against love. I should have fled this temptation, yet I lingered before her. I should have kept God's covenant, yet here I fell. My spirit was already blind. This was Satan's snare. I used spiritual excuses to cover sin, convincing myself these were small matters. My fear of God grew dim. My resistance to sin grew weak, until the last spiritual sense vanished in passion. I gradually forgot that I was set apart for God, forgot His calling, and my life's mission. I began to think such temptations were trivial, such games were harmless. This was my foolishness. Seeing I wouldn't tell the truth, Delilah threatened to leave. My heart finally yielded to temptation, revealing life's secret. I told her, no razor has ever touched my head, because from birth, I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. This was my life's secret. Delilah knew this was truth. She sent for the Philistine leaders, saying, "He has told me everything. You can come now. She made me sleep on her lap. While I was in deep sleep, she called someone to shave off the 7 braids of my hair. My strength left me indeed, like God's presence leaving the temple. I lost the mark of consecration and lost God-given power. When I awoke, I thought I would go out as before and shake myself free. Not knowing the Lord had left me, the Philistines seized me, gouged out my eyes, like my spiritual blindness finally manifested physically. They took me down to Gaza, bound me with bronze chains, set me to grinding in the prison, like a lion caged. This was the end of my fall, the price of my rebellion. I failed God's choosing and Israel's hope. In the days of grinding, I constantly pondered God's works, understanding His lifelong guidance, seeing clearly my own rebellion. Set apart from the womb, God gave me extraordinary strength, but I used it for self-glory rather than honoring His name. I broke the Nazirite vow, drawing close to foreign women, lost in passion, forgetting God's trust. In the days of grinding, I finally understood God's purpose for my strength was not for my pride, though my physical eyes were dark. I finally understood God's heart. This suffering revealed my true self and showed me God's faithfulness. My hair began to grow again, not just outward restoration, but rebuilding my relationship with God. This was God's second chance. The Philistines thought they had conquered me and conquered the Lord. This was their pride. They didn't know God's plan never changed. He would use this broken vessel to achieve final victory. In prison, I prayed constantly to God, asking Him to use me again, to fulfill His purpose. That day the Philistines gathered to offer great sacrifice to their god Dagon. All Gaza City was stirring, people flooding to the temple. They said Dagon had delivered their enemy into their hands. This was blasphemy against the Lord. The temple echoed with their cheers and praises to Dagon. The temple was packed with spectators. All the rulers were there, men and women young and old pressed together. 3,000 watched from the roof. They drank and made merry, mocking the God of Israel, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson to us, the one who caused us so much suffering." Their hearts were glad. They called for me to be brought out, to entertain them, to humiliate God's servant. I was brought from prison, through the noisy streets, hearing the mockery around me. Yet my heart was strangely peaceful. They positioned me between 2 pillars, the main supports of the entire temple. The laughter within the temple reminded me of my past sins. I said to the servant holding my hand, "Let me feel the pillars that support the temple, so I may lean against them." He guided me to the pillars. My hands touched the stone columns, feeling their roughness, knowing this was God's final chance for me. Then I prayed quietly to God, saying, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, please give me strength once more to avenge my 2 eyes upon the Philistines." My prayer was no longer for myself. This time I finally understood God's will. Though my life was a failure, God could still use me to complete my mission in the final moment, for God's glory, for Israel's deliverance, to fulfill my mission. I touched the supporting pillars, my heart filled with faith. I said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then I pushed with all my might. The 2 pillars collapsed. A great crash shook the earth. 3,000 on the roof, and all the rulers and people inside were crushed in the ruins. Those I killed in my death were more than those I killed in my life. This was God's power, made perfect in human weakness. This was God's work. He used a broken vessel to display His power in the final moment, reminding us even in our falls, God's mercy and grace never change. My life, though full of weakness and failure, God's grace was sufficient. His power made perfect in weakness. My story reminds the world, God's gifts are not given for our own glory, but to fulfill His purpose. The Book of Judges records. Samson led Israel for 20 years. This is the testimony of God's servant forever. This story reminds us to carefully guard God's gifts, not losing His presence through pride and indulgence. We all may face temptation, like Samson met Delilah, but God always provides a way out, enabling us to overcome temptation. Even when we fall, God's mercy never changes. If we truly repent, He will use us again. In spiritual warfare, our victory lies not in ourselves, but in relying on God's mighty power, serving Him with a humble heart. Thank you for listening to this story. May God's Word take root in your heart, bearing fruit of life. If this story has helped you, please subscribe to our channel. Share these precious lessons with others. Growing together in truth. Like and share to help more people see this video. Let God's Word continue to spread in this generation.